Let's testify, man.
Oh God, you've done so much for me. I'm grateful and overwhelmed here at your feet. And I could stay here forever, Lord, but you call me to something more. And I hear you say that you have a plan to use every broken woman and man to display just how good you are. We are your living pieces of art. What good does it do to hide away when all of my scars are a picture of grace? All right. So I will testify of the power of God. Tell the world of the hope I have found. For my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, do you believe it? Has He done it for anyone else? I said, has He done it for anyone else? Cause the God that I serve, He's always at work. Has He done it for anyone else? So come on and testify of the power of God. Come on and tell the world of the hope we have found. For our body was broken, our hearts were made whole, and that's too good to keep to yourself. Come on and testify of the power of God. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify your voice. This is my. So I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify. Come on, take it out. Jesus, my champion, the victor of grace, the only one worthy of all of my praise. Yeah. So come on and testify. Oh, somebody lift Him high. Come on, testify of the power of God. I will tell the world of the hope I have found. Oh, for my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Sing that. Oh, my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, let's do that right now, Murfreesboro.
And good morning, everybody. I hope that you are doing well, or at least as well as can be. Yes, the timer is going today because I do have a hard out time due to things that just have to be done. But in the meantime, I am glad to still be kicking. It's kind of interesting. I've been considering some things lately that I think are interesting. I know there's only one of you here right now, but hopefully more will come. But I thought I would ramble for just a moment to see, to give you guys a chance to come in. So the renowned astrophysicist Carl Sagan, back in the 1970s, wrote his magnum opus, a book called Cosmos. And Cosmos was a book that Sagan wrote as basically kind of an introductory course in astrophysics. And if you've never read it, it is an excellent book for the most part. It has some definitive problems that I'll talk about in a minute, but the overall, as far as a book about physics for the layperson, it's really, really good. So good, in fact. And the book was written as a companion piece to a PBS television series of the same name that Sagan himself hosted. And it actually inspired a later edition of both the book and the series, hosted by the current, I'll say, pop culture astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson. And again, Cosmos is meant as an introduction to the universe for a layperson's perspective, from written by and presented by astrophysicists. So what does that have to do with anything I'd be talking about, you may ask? Well, the interesting thing about Cosmos is Sagan's choosing of that particular title. Now, cosmos, of course, is a word we all know. It means the universe. It means all that there is. And so the idea was that Sagan wanted to present, he was a cosmologist, a branch of science that is about the study of the universe, about all that there is. And yet, the word cosmos, while extremely important to people like Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson, is also a word that has some very ancient roots. Cosmos is actually just the modernization of a Greek word, a classic Greek word, also pronounced cosmos. The only difference between the Greek version and the modern English version is that in English, the original Greek version is written with a K instead of a C. But other than that, it's pretty much the same word. Now, if you look at it in Greek, it's got weird symbols that aren't, American English, so, I can't quite follow them because I don't read the Greek alphabet. But the word cosmos has been around for a very, very long time. How long, you may ask? Well, I'm glad you asked, because the word appears in the New Testament of the Bible 186 times. And this is one of the problems that I see with English translations of Scripture. Not that you shouldn't translate, because I do think you should. But the problem is that many people will then take the English translation as being the original word of God. And in fact, there are some people that go so far as to suggest that a particular translation is in fact the inspired word of God, and every other translation is not. But I would dare say that every English translation is just that, a translation, and therefore an imperfect representation of God's word. And that's assuming that the manuscripts that it's translated from were perfect. And so we have to be very, very careful about making grand assumptions uh, about the nature of God or the nature of certain passages of Scripture until we're willing to investigate the original languages that it was written in. And this is all circling around to a passage that is honestly not one that's particularly well known, uh, not one that most people find particularly profound, although I do, but I didn't even really make note of this passage until fairly recently. And it's just one of those lines in the Bible that was never anybody's favorite to talk about, but I'm going to talk about it today. And let me switch screens here. And don't worry, Josiah, I'll get to your comments in just a minute. I just wanted to talk about this for just a moment. All right, here we go. So this is Romans, or I'm sorry, not Romans, Acts. And if you haven't read Acts, it's a fascinating book. Our church is currently going through a study of Acts, but it's funny, we haven't gotten to this chapter yet, though. And Acts is a direct sequel to the Gospel of Luke. It's like the Gospel of Luke, it's written by Luke, and it is an accounting of basically the formation of an organization of the early church. So, what did Peter and the rest do after Christ's resurrection? And Acts answers that question. So it shows the rise of the early church, the recruitment of the greatest evangelist, and which would be Paul. But in Acts chapter 17, there's a few things that are going on here, but I'm actually going to do something I generally don't like to do, and that is to focus in on one particular verse, because we're not, while this is a great section of the Bible, it's really this one thing I just want to zero in on. In this particular passage, Paul is talking to the people of Athens. He's trying to basically reach out to people that are in Greece and teaching them about following the one true God as opposed to their pagan tradition of the Greco-Roman gods. And so let me, I'll read a small section of it, and then we'll zero in on what I'm trying to focus on. Starting at verse 16, it says, "While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there." Notice the way that it's phrased that. So in the synagogue, he's talking to Jews and God-fearing Greeks. So in the synagogue, he's speaking basically to a friendly audience, to people that already believe that Christ was the Messiah and the savior of mankind and all that good stuff. But when he was in the marketplace, now he's just talking to the general public, most of whom in Athens would be non-believers. And so he's basically talking to those that are either pagans or straight up atheists, and trying to convince them of Christ. So a group of, Epicureans and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. So these are serious, serious people. I mean, if you want to have, you think debating online in the 21st century is tough, try going up against Epicurean and Stoics from ancient Greece. Good luck. But anyway, some of them asked, what is this babbler trying to say? Others remarked, seems to be advocating foreign gods. They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. They took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, or Areopagus, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, where they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You're bringing some strange ideas to our ears. We would like to know what they mean. All of the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. So basically, they were genuinely curious because, one good thing about this particular society is that they were very much into new ways of thinking, something that we are afraid of on college campuses and stuff today. Paul then stood up in the meeting and said, people of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious, for I have walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship. I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship. Now, notice he's not saying, and this is another thing we tend to think about it in the present tense, if somebody calls you ignorant, we tend to take that as an insult. Paul was using the word for what it actually means, which is to simply not know, to lack knowledge on something. And so if you are praying to an unknown God, then by definition, that means you are ignorant of this God. You don't know the God. And that's the whole point of his presentation here. Back up just to say, found the inscription, to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of this very thing you worship. And this is what I am going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. He is not severed by human hands, and he has as if he needed anything, rather, or he's not served, by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. All right, that's enough. So I want to zero in on one verse of this. Now, I think it's a neat passage. And Paul, one thing that he was very good at was talking to people at their own level. So, he actually understood the Greco-Roman pantheon. And so it made it easier for him to talk to people who were believers in that pantheon. But here, he says something very, very interesting. And that is verse 24. And that's the verse we're going to spend a little bit of time focusing on. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. Now, that's a pretty, I think to someone who's a believer in God, I would say that there's nothing controversial about this statement. Even to someone is like, if someone is an atheist or agnostic, even though I don't like the term agnostic because nobody is a true agnostic, but that's a whole other can of worms. Even if you're an atheist or agnostic, I don't think you would find that statement particularly controversial. You might disagree with it, but you wouldn't find it something that would be like, whoa, that's fringe, because, the idea that God doesn't live in a physical structure and what your beliefs are on God's authority. that and then I realized something that I hadn't thought of before. And so I'm going to, as you guys, if you remember, I've shown this before on Bible Gateway. If you have the pro version, which I fortunately do, you can turn on this little thing where it shows you the Greek and or Hebrew words behind each word in the translation. So now, if we go back to that verse, we're going to see something really, really interesting. Some words make perfect sense. Like God is translated from theos. That's where, when we think of theology is the study of God. Theos literally means God. But get this. So the God who made the word world is the word cosmos. And so when we hear the God who made the world, we think of God making earth. But this particular passage and the context in which Paul is talking, I think he's going bigger than that. I think that he means cosmos the way we tend to think of the word today. That this is the God who made everything, not just and granted, even if he meant this as the world, meaning earth, these are a bunch of pagans, people who believe that there is a God of the storm and a God of the sea and a God of the sky and a God of the land and all that. If you look at the pantheon of gods from the Greco-Roman era, there's a God for a lot of different things. But in this particular case, he's talking about the God of the cosmos, the God who made everything. So we forget that the English Bibles that we're used to reading are in fact translations. And there are 186 references to that word cosmos, mostly being translated to world in the English translations. But honestly, a lot of those translations may mean something much bigger than the world. And even what's interesting is that if you think about that particular passage, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. So here's the funny thing about that particular passage. Let me go back there for just a second. I forgot to mention this. So if the word cosmos here is simply referring to the earth, because sometimes people think, like I said, it's commonly translated to world or earth. But as you can see here, it also can mean whole universe, but it all depends on the context in which it's used. Whoops, switch chapters by accident. Hate when I do that. So treat that back down. But notice in the verse, we go straight from God made the world, and he's the Lord of heaven and earth, right? So if world and earth are synonymous, then particularly in the context of this actual sentence, if these two words mean the same thing, world and earth, then they should be translated from the same thing. So we should see the word cosmos for world and the word cosmos for earth, right? I mean, that makes sense, I hope, to everybody that's listening to me. However, that's not what we find. We find the world is cosmos, earth is the word kai, K-A-I. Oh, no, that's the word and. I'm sorry. G. I'm sorry, or G. G E. And notice Gi translates to earth, world, country, region, land, ground, soil, earth. So it is, in fact, a word that means earth, like the dirt that you pick up, or earth as in the planet that we live on. And so, and yes, it was. Wow, I just got a super chat and the thing actually worked for once. June, it is so good to see you. I've not, you're right, we haven't seen you in a while. Um, how am I doing? Oh, boy, that's a long, long story. Let me finish my little spiel about Cosmos and then I will talk about that. Um, so, because I do have a little bit to talk about that anyway. Uh, so, so if the word cosmos is just meant to be the Earth, then why do we have a different word in this very same passage for Earth? Because here we have Earth, the word ki, heaven, the word wow, uh, Aranos, right, and so, and notice that Armos, when we think of heaven, like well, most time we think of, oh, God's domain, right? But notice what it says here. Ardos means sky, air, firmament, any area above the earth, the heavens, the place of the sun, the moon, the stars, and also heaven in which God dwells. And so, if you combined the word Arnos and uh, the word Gi, you have everything above the earth and earth itself. And then it's saying that this is the God of the cosmos. I think that it makes perfect sense that the word cosmos in this passage means cosmos, as in the word that Carl Sagan uses as the title of his book. So now, before I get to the regular chat, June, thank you again for the super chat. You have no idea how much I appreciate that. So, looks like I'm better now. Well, thank you. I don't know how I was the last time you and I talked. It's been a while. But, okay, so I will say this. As far as, so I'm dealing with some stuff that, well, is a little unnerving, I would say, but it is what it is. Where I'm at right now, aside from the regular MS stuff, is I'm dealing with two problems in my neck, of all places. When they did an MRI of me last year, they noticed something unusual in the back of my neck. And so there are two main arteries that go up the back of your neck. And on one of them, they saw an aneurysm, which is a bulging of your artery. And if an aneurysm gets too big or too stressed, it can burst. And a burst aneurysm, especially if it's a major artery, is very commonly fatal. So that's something to be concerned about. On the other side of the neck, they saw an occlusion, which is a blockage in an artery. And so on that side, if the blockage gets too heavy, it can, cause things like a stroke and stuff like that. So, so basically, two ticking time bombs in the back of my neck. So they tried to get they wanted to get a better look at how bad these things are. So I did what's called an MRA, which is similar to an MRI, except that it focuses directly on the blood vessels to kind of see how your blood is flowing. And when they did the MRA, the results were somewhat inconclusive. So now I have to see a cardiovascular surgeon to talk about it, and that I'm doing this week. Now, am I totally stressed out about what's going on? Not really in the traditional sense. I'll say this. I am basically at a point in my life to where I'm not worried about my life ending. There's really no point. Everybody's life comes to an end. Or as Yoda would say, death is a natural part of life. So I'm not overtly concerned about dying. I'm not concerned about, oh my gosh, if the aneurysm bursts and I just drop dead, you know. Honestly, I'm not worried about that because sooner or later I'm going to die, and I try to take the attitude of Paul, which is that to die is gain. Ultimately, once you die, then you get to spend eternity with Christ, and that's a good thing. So I ain't worried about that. I am a little concerned, like when what I get concerned about when I think about death is what happens to my family, and who's going to take care of them. I worry about them. I shouldn't, but I do. And I just have to have faith that between family, friends, church, etc., that they will be taken care of. So I try not to stress myself out too much about that kind of thing. But it is concerning, and I don't like the idea of having to go through all the tests and all that stuff. But I will definitely, after I see the cardiovascular surgeon this week, hopefully I'll know more. And I'll let you know if I indeed could die at any given moment. Of course, if I die between now and then, you won't know about it. But I sincerely doubt that will happen. Famous last words. All right, so now I'm just going to go through the chat as much as I can and in the next hour and 21 minutes, and we'll see where that leads us. Now, Josiah, first in the house, says, if I was a Mormon, I would have more than one wife. If I were a Mormon, that would definitely be a possibility, but I don't know that I would because it is, I don't actually understand Mormons that do take on multiple wives, not because I don't see, particularly, I can understand why it's appealing to some. I can even understand why, from a religious standpoint, why you might think of it as good, because the Mormons are very strong believers in having lots and lots of children, and I think having a lot of kids could be great as long as you can pay for them, right? But this is where I think the Mormon Church, granted they don't actively endorse polygamy, at least not anymore. And because, I think that you would run into this problem where if polygamy is illegal, and people like Paul in the Bible very, very clearly and specifically say that we are to obey the law, then that would include polygamy laws. And so even if you disagree with it, there's nothing about that. People take this attitude that if they don't think that the law is completely compatible with their religious beliefs, then they should ignore that law. And quite frankly, that's an unbiblical assessment. It's not like, so even if you believe, okay, like nowhere in the Bible does it specifically say you should have more than one wife. And in fact, there's plenty of places where it recommends against that. However, even if you believe that the Bible endorses polygamy, it's not a compulsion, right? It's not something like you are not commanded to to have more than one wife. At best, you can simply say it was an accepted practice, and I kind of liken it to when we talk about slavery in the Bible. Slavery is not endorsed by the Bible. At best, you could say that it was an accepted practice. So the same is true polygamy. So if there's a law against something that is not compelled in the Bible, but is allowed in the Bible, does that make it a law that you should, based on biblical principles, disobey? And the answer is absolutely not. The only times in Scripture that it is shown to be okay to disobey a law is if the law compels you to do something that is in fact blasphemy. And I believe the only actual example of this is when King Nebuchadnezzar tried to compel everybody to worship a particular statue as opposed to worshiping Yahweh. And so because of that, Rack, Shack, and Benny decided to disobey that law. And they were justified in doing so. However, a law against taking more than one wife is not on the same level as a law compelling worship of an idol. So I would probably say that I would not have more than one wife because I do believe in obeying the law, because that's what we're taught to do in Scripture. Trump is hell-bent on making our lives way harder. I try to be as fair-minded as I can when it comes to things like this. Look, I think that Trump, he probably believes what he's doing is good. And the problem with a lot of our modern politics is that you have two sides that have distinctly different beliefs on what the best way to approach things is and are completely unwilling to talk to each other to work out a solution to the problems that we have, and instead are focused on simply attacking the other side, which is ultimately counterproductive. And let's see, Miss Moneypenny is on the way to church, which is why I know later she says that she was leaving, and also suggests everybody hit the thumbs up, which that would be wonderful if you would. Robert in the house says shalom this morning. Shalom, shalom, Robert. I hope you are well. God lives everywhere. That is true. But keep in mind that to many people in this day, when they think of the word God, they think of a statue, an idol, an object to be worshipped is a god. And so Paul was addressing a group of people that have this as their core beliefs. And Paul was very good at adapting the way he talked to the people he was talking to. Well, nowadays, who would be able to enter the Holy of Holies and still live if the temple was still around? Based on the, well, I think that keep in mind, when it comes to entering the Holy of Holies, if it were still in existence today, there are very specific rules as to who may enter it. And rule number one is that it must be a direct descendant of Aaron. And so, I, not being an expert on Jewish culture, I don't know if there are any true Levites still around. But you would have to be a Levite, number one. So if there are Levites, then they would also have to be consecrated as high priest. They would have to go through all the ritual sacrifice before entering into the Holy of Holies so that they could be ceremonially cleaned, which the Jews don't even do sacrifice anymore. So if you're unwilling or unable to do the necessary sacrifice, then the answer would be no one could enter the Holy of Holies. However, I would say if there are direct descendants of Aaron still in existence today, and they were willing to do all the necessary ritual cleanings and sacrifices, then they could indeed still enter the Holy of Holies. Because people today, yes, are horrible, sinful, terrible people. People 5,000 years ago were horrible, terrible, sinful people. People really haven't changed that much. We like to think that we've changed, we've become more sophisticated and everything, but the truth is people haven't changed that much. We've just improved our technology, and that's just because we retain knowledge from one generation to another. So technology and scientific knowledge and understanding will always improve as long as man doesn't destroy himself. So we know more now than we knew 50 years ago, and we will know more in 50 years than we know now. Robert says, there's also scripture evidence that the so-called Jews that are in the land of Israel nowadays aren't true biblical Israelites. I don't know what scripture evidence you're talking about there, so I would want to know, I guess, what specifically, like, are you saying because they're not pure genetically? Because, I mean, nobody is, but I'm not 100% sure what you mean. I don't remember the scripture right offhand says that. Well, without that, I can't really comment on it. And June says, "Earp." I'm not sure why. Just like, unfortunately, South Carolina gives $30 million in taxpayers' money. Just like, unfortunately, South Carolina gives $30 million in taxpayers' money, $30 million annually. $30 million to what? I'm not sure what you mean. And there's Miss Moneypenny taking off. You have a good one, Miss Moneypenny. I hope your church service goes very well. Robert says, instead of that money staying here in the state, going to infrastructure and keeping the needs be done. So you're saying that, like, when you in the taxes that they collect, 30 million goes, like, the federal government collects 30 million in taxes more than what goes into your state. But let me say this, when it comes to that kind of thing, if that's what you're upset about, you need to check yourself, because all that means is that there's another state that needs money more than you. And I understand that, yes, the government spends money on things that we don't like. And I'm not defending, like, money goes to abortion or whatever. And I don't like that any more than you do. But if they're taking money from South Carolina, but they're putting more money into Alabama, then maybe the people of Alabama needed that money more than the people of South Carolina did. And maybe, just maybe, the people of Alabama are every bit as American as the people in South Carolina. We are still one nation. I mean, because then what are you going to say? Are you going to say, well, wait a minute, people in Rutherford County pay more in state taxes than people in Humboldt County, and so, but the people in Humboldt County are getting more money, and therefore that's not fair. Or what if you say, wait a minute, my household pays more in taxes than what I use in services compared to my next door neighbor? You know, and in fact, I'll give you a splendid example. My primary income is, in fact, Social Security. So that's my personal income is Social Security. So that means that I am a net drain on the system compared to, say, my next door neighbor who works a regular old job and pays money into Social Security. Does that make it unfair that the government is giving me more money than I pay in taxes? Because I basically don't pay any taxes right now. But is that fair to my neighbor? And I would say, well, that's the whole point of having one nation. Now, I know you're going to talk about Israel in a second here, and we'll get to that. June says, well, Salty, I wish you the best. Perhaps someone should play a prank on you and have you surrounded by cats when you wake up one morning. That would be horrible. We have one cat, and one cat is one cat too many. Robert says, Justin, the government of Israel has made it illegal for any of the Jews to have DNA testing done. I haven't heard that. That's a little odd. Why would they make it illegal to have DNA testing done? Let's see. Okay, so what Israel does do, it says, is test. They use DNA testing to verify Jewish parentage of individuals who are immigrating to Israel. But I'm trying to see. Let's see. Israel does not ban DNA testing. I'm not sure where you're getting that from, but at least from what I can see, it doesn't look like that's true. Okay, here is what is restricted. Direct-to-consumer ancestry kits cannot be sold in Israel because genetic testing must be performed in licensed medical labs. Paternity tests, let's see, are restricted to requiring a court order and identity-related tests, ancestry, lineage, familial connection following the same oversight. So I guess it depends, so it would look like things like 23andMe, yes, you can't do that because Israel requires a DNA test be done in licensed medical labs, which 23andMe is not licensed by the state of Israel. So that makes sense. I might not agree with it as a practice, but I don't think it's as egregious as you seem to. And then this is where you're talking about as far as the 30 million in taxes. You say they give 30 million annually to Israel. Now, if your state, and I don't know, so forgive me my ignorance of this. So if your state is directly giving $30 million to Israel, that's kind of an odd thing for a state to do as opposed to because I know the federal government gives aid to Israel. And if your state is, and I know there are states that do things like this, so perhaps South Carolina is one of them. If your state is giving money directly to Israel, while that's unusual, that's what we do with allies. And I understand you may not like Israel's current political regime. You may not like what's going on in Palestine. You may not like what's going on in Iran. However, Israel is an ally. And, what about all the other allies that we've given money to over the years? They're not all wonderful. And I mean, how much money have we spent on Europe over the last, 40, 50 years? Compared to how Europe feels, if we're going to take it from a Christian perspective, Europe is extremely hostile to the idea of God belief compared to the United States. Did young Michael ever get into a pillow fight? I'm sure I did. I don't recall any off the top of my head. I'm done taking care of animals. Well, then don't have pets, I guess. Stan in the house says, good morning. How you doing, Stan? Hope you are well. And then Josiah says, Superman versus Tasmanian Devil? Really? Come on now. Poor Taz wouldn't have a chance against old Superman. Because Taz, while is much stronger and faster than most of the other Looney Tunes characters, he still doesn't have Kryptonian level powers in any way, shape, or form. So that would be kind of a one-sided fight at best. All right, and believe it or not, I'm actually caught up in the chat. That almost never happens. So we'll see if. But of course, Stan just joined us, so that might be why. I keep sleeping in, and you've been starting earlier last couple of weeks. Well, I do it just because I'm messing with you. Because what's going to happen is as soon as you start getting up early, I'm going to start doing my shows later. And that's just how I roll. And honestly, part of the reason that I'm doing the show earlier is that I do have to get driving done, for the old Uber thing. And my daughter now goes to a church that meets Sunday morning. Like, we all go to church on Saturday night, but she goes to another church that I guess some friends go to or something that's on Sunday morning. And so I drop her off at that church as I start my day Ubering around. It's that same math from Friday's stream. Yeah, we didn't talk about this formula up here, but yes, what's behind your name right there is equals MC squared, and then the mass of what would be necessary to be a molecule of omega, which would be 1.1 to the 10 times 10 to the 30th power kilograms, which is roughly 55% of the mass of the sun in a single atom, which is, not only impossible, it's just kind of silly. But this formula, I'm really intrigued by. I still don't quite understand it, but I'm very intrigued by it. And this is the formula for time dilation, in case you're wondering, and it's from relativity. Darren says, good morning, Michael. May you have fat fares today. Well, thank you, Darren. That is about the nicest thing I think you've ever said to me. Or did somebody hack your account? That must be it. And Daniel Kohler says, what are some of your favorite examples of Paul being good at talking to people where they're at? Well, honestly, the passage that I just read from Acts is a splendid example. And in fact, it's funny. This whole chapter of Acts is Paul in different places. It starts out in Thessalonica, and then the next part of the chapter is in Berea, and then finally in Athens, which is where he uses the passage that I was talking about. And I'm actually thinking about designing a 3D print of the text of that passage, because I love the use of the word cosmos so much in that passage that I kind of want it to be somewhere as a reminder to me that God is God of the cosmos. But yeah, I would say that Acts chapter 17 is a great place to start. That, and if you look at just some of the subtle differences between Paul's letters to different regional areas, and you can see that one thing that Paul is also good at is one of the reasons I think he's the great evangelist and Peter isn't, is that he was able to look at different churches in different places and see what their needs were and understand that their needs were different. And so that's why he doesn't write to the Corinthians the same way he writes to the Romans, right? So I think that that Paul was just absolutely a genius when it came to that kind of thing. And Stan says, right, omega molecule, yes. The omega molecule particle atom, depending on which line of dialogue you're going by. And that's not a problem with Starfleet Academy. That's a problem with Voyager. Because in the Omega Directive, or whatever the name of the episode was, they refer to it as a particle, an atom, and a molecule all in one sentence. Just like a few years ago, Death Battle did a video about Hulk versus Doomsday. I don't think their outcomes. I don't take their outcomes serious. Hulk survived and came back from being in a black hole. After all, he was literally ripped apart on a cellular level, and his rage and gamma energy was enough for him to come back. Well, when you do these versus battles, it's tough because a lot of times in the comics, they take these characters and they start they have what's called power creep, right? Where they in order to keep it interesting, they always have to up things. And so the villains become more powerful, which means the hero has to become more powerful to counter the villain. So then the villain becomes more powerful than that. So the hero has to, and it just continues on and on and on forever. And that's one of the reasons we go from the original Star Trek, where the Enterprise is fairly simple and easy to understand, to the current Star Trek that takes place in the 32nd century, where technology is magic. And because you constantly have to one up what came before. The problem started with TNG, where in TNG, everything had to be better, everything had to be bigger, everything had to be faster. And by the time you get to like Picard, now you don't even need engineers because the ship just fixes itself. Well, what's the fun in that, right? United States from the 19th century versus the British Empire. Well, in an all-out war if you were trying to take the complete military of the United States versus the complete military of the British Empire would probably win. But the British Empire was spread out. Was Paul a missionary? You could argue that he was an evangelist, to be sure. He was a church planter, and obviously prior to his conversion, he was a Pharisee. So he was an extremely educated man. But yeah, so Paul did go on several mission trips, if you will, where he would plant churches and then go back and visit said churches to see how they were doing. He wasn't a missionary in the idea of when you think of, we'll build a church outpost in the middle of the jungle somewhere and try to reach out to the natives and convert them. He was more but he was in that he traveled from place to place and did try to convince people. Death Battle had Doomsday winning the battle. Well, a lot of these channels. There's another one, Danco. I like Danco, just like I like Death Battle, but they're very biased. Like Danco clearly has this thing about DC, and so he always has DC win, even though sometimes his explanations are lacking, or even he'll explain why his own results are impossible. Like an example, he was talking about Wonder Woman versus Wonder Man. Now, I'm not a big Wonder Man fan, and Darren, if you're still listening, you can probably confirm or deny any of this. Just based on what Danco was saying, he said that Wonder Man in the comic books, it turns out he's not even flesh and blood. He's a being of pure energy, and his solid form is more or less just a projection of this energy. And then he talks about Wonder Woman has this great sword, like the God Killer sword, and the sword is so sharp that it can cut even at the molecular level, which is crazy because that would mean that every time this is the problem with bad writing. If her sword literally was sharp enough to slice molecules, then every time she swung her sword, a huge, massive nuclear blast would happen because it would cause nuclear fission if she was literally ripping atoms apart. But I digress. So he says her sword is so sharp that she could cut Wonder Man, but you can't cut energy. That's not physically possible. Energy doesn't have mass, and if there's no mass, then there's no way to cut it. Yet, that's what he's trying to suggest. So basically, take it with a grain of salt. Most people with these kind of battles, they don't go by what the actual facts are. They go by whatever their personal favorite. Just like the classic, Star Wars versus Star Trek battle, right? In that if you have a Star Destroyer versus the original Enterprise, or in this case, the Enterprise A right here, people say, oh, well, look how much bigger the Star Destroyer is. The problem is that the technology in the Enterprise is so much more advanced that the Star Destroyer has no chance. But people don't want to see that. They want it to seem like it's a fair, balanced fight somehow, even though it's not even close. The Star Destroyer is not going to even get a single shot off. But, whatever. People got to be people. What did they name the people spreading the word of Christ shortly after the crucifixion? I don't know if there was. Because early on there were the followers of the way, the followers of the light, and Christians were all early names for the group of people initially. And keep in mind, and this is another thing we've kind of lost in the modern church. Every Christian is supposed to be spreading the word of Christ, not just the evangelist or the missionary or something like that. Paul went on various mission trips where he evangelized to people. But it is the duty of all Christians to evangelize all the time. We just don't do it. Evangelists have different. Well, in the modern context, yes, we have, and it also depends on. The problem is that that's evangelist and missionary aren't even universally accepted terms today, because to some people, a missionary, for example, might be a person who lives in Uganda and helps the people in Uganda from a mission, which would be a building owned by the church and maintained by the church for the specific purpose of the missionary to be able to reach out to the people, right? That's what most people think of. But if you look at like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a mission is when you have the two guys wearing white shirts and black ties going door to door saying, let me talk to you about the Book of Mormon. That to them is your time as a missionary, right? Even though you're never leaving the country, and many times you're not even leaving where the city where you live, but you are on a mission trip.
Don't forget the pop-up.
And sorry, and the alarm that we can figures. We'll just set that over an hour from now. Okay. What if Michael was a fire truck? Well, then I guess I would be putting out fires. Unfortunately, evangelist has acquired sort of negative. Yeah, because now, when we think of evangelists, a lot of times we think of these like televangelists, right? People that are on the TV screens or now internet screens, basically trying to turn Jesus into an ends to getting massive amounts of money. And unfortunately, they're very successful at it. But evangelism is simply trying to be out there spreading the good word of whatever it is that you're pushing, right? And that's why, like, even some companies, like Adobe, for example, the company that makes various software solutions, they have employees that they actually call evangelists, and their job is to go out there and talk about why their product is superior to the other products of the same type. That is the correct use of the word evangelist. It's just kind of weird in the modern context because we always think of it in as specifically a person who's on TV trying to get money for God. Being how they describe TV church guys, yes. And Darren says, in King Kong vs. Godzilla, the original, they had to make Kong the same height as Godzilla and give him lightning powers to be able to fight Godzilla. Power creep. Yes, that is a great example, actually. And I hated the fact that they did that in that movie. At least in the modern MonsterVerse, they just kind of rebooted Kong and made him bigger, right? That's fine. But yeah, if you're gonna, in King Kong vs. Godzilla, it was kind of hilarious that they had to give him lightning powers to fight Godzilla. But you know, another thing that's I think kind of cool about the remake is that it's, you know, you would say, well, without lightning powers and stuff, Kong doesn't have a chance. That's true. You know, in the modern movie, he needed a power axe that could counter Godzilla's fire, atomic breath and stuff. However, it still wasn't enough, and Kong got his butt handed to him by Godzilla. Which I think is fairly realistic. However, it took the two of them together to solve certain problems. Speaking of which, I got to watch Monarch this week now that Starfleet Academy is thankfully done. Let's see. Is that Godzilla -1 sequel coming out this year? Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know when that's supposed to come out, but man, am I looking forward to that. Were you a fan? You also rate Godzilla -1's the best Godzilla movie. I'm curious about that too. Would that create nuclear reactions? If you're talking about Wonder Woman's sword, then it absolutely would. Here we go. Wonder Man is made of ionic energy. He goes toe-to-toe with the likes of the Hulk and Thor. In order for Wonder Woman to win, she would have to use more than just her magic lasso. Right, well, they were talking about her using her magic sword that's just so sharp it can cut atoms. But again, if you could cut atoms, then every time she swung the sword, it would cause a thermonuclear reaction because she'd be splitting a bunch of atoms in the air. You know, it's just bad writing. Let's see. The Doctor from Doctor Who versus Galactus. Well, on the surface, I would say Galactus. I mean, because the Doctor from Doctor Who really is not a particularly powerful individual. I mean, he has tools at his disposal that have near infinite abilities, right? Particularly the TARDIS and his sonic screwdriver, which does whatever the writing needs it to do. But the Doctor himself is really more or less just a guy who regenerates. And so if you were fighting Galactus, Galactus could just absorb his energy and it would be over. I'm not even sure what an ion is. Well, it's funny. Star Trek is the biggest abuser, especially Star Trek, the original series, of the word ion. So an ion is, and just to, I wanted to make sure I had the correct definition here. But an ion is an atom or molecule with a net electric charge due to the loss or gain of one or more electrons. So it's a charged atom. So keep in mind that an atom, so let's, Professor Michael's atomic theory. All right, so let's move our Star Destroyer. Where those magnets stick? And these magnets suck. We need better magnets. All right, so let's take a basic atom, right? So we'll do a helium atom. Well, yeah, why not? We'll do a helium atom. All right. So here's a basic helium atom where you have our nucleus with the protons and neutrons in it, and then we have two electrons that are orbiting the nucleus. And orbiting is kind of a not entirely correct way to put it, but that's what most people think of. All right, so if this helium atom gains another electron, now keep in mind protons have a positive charge, electrons have a negative charge. So if now you have three electrons and you still only have, you don't gain or lose protons in an atom, you gain or lose electrons. So if you gain an electron, now you have three negative charges and two positive charges in the nucleus. So this is now a negatively charged atom. And keep in mind, when we think about negative and positive charges, it really, people get confused because it doesn't actually mean anything negative or net positive about something. It's just an arbitrary term that was created, just like North Pole, South Pole. The definition of the North Pole is it's the part of the magnet that attracts to another magnet's South Pole. It's arbitrary. And by the way, what's interesting about that is, if you have a compass, the compass uses a magnet and points to the North Pole, right? Except that the compass is using a magnet that is attracted to the North Pole. But the definition of the poles is that the compass's North Pole would be attracted to the South Pole. So the North Pole of the Earth is the South Pole magnetically. But anyway, back to this. So if we were to remove an electron. So now we have one electron, two protons. So now we have a net positive charge. So either one of those, whether if you have a helium atom with one electron or a helium atom with three electrons, either one of those will be considered an ion. However, it's not an ion if it doesn't have any net positive or negative charges. An atom that is not ionized in some way has the same amount of protons as electrons, and so it's electrically neutral. Sorry. I find that stuff interesting. Sounds like this YouTuber you're talking about who always picks DC is a blithering idiot. Yeah, I wouldn't call him a blithering idiot. That's more your thing, but I would definitely say he's biased. A favorite clever Paul example, brothers, I am a Pharisee, son of Pharisees, is with respect to the hope and resurrection of the dead that I am on trial. Yeah, you see, Paul, that's the thing about Paul. Paul was an extremely educated man. And now, the interesting thing about the New Testament, if you look at it, is that Peter and the gang were mostly not educated, right? If you look at the original 12, Judas and Matthew were probably the most educated of them. However, the rest of them were mostly just working stiffs, right? And Peter and Andrew in particular were brothers who were fishermen. And so that probably their entire education was their dad teaching them how to fish, like they kind of depict in The Chosen. So Paul comes along and is an actual educated Pharisee. Nicodemus, who was not one of the original 12, but who Jesus kind of invited to join them, he was a Pharisee, but he didn't quite have the nerve to join. Joseph of Arimathea, who provided the tomb for Jesus's body, was also a Pharisee. So there were educated people who followed Christ, but as far as the apostles, the apostolic ministry is concerned, by far the most educated man would have been Paul, and the only Pharisee among the group. You would need to make an Enterprise D to show the scale compared to the original. Oh, you mean for my magnetic stuff? I may. The Enterprise D would be probably about this big-ish. And who decided the name Christians? Is one person given credit? No, there's not a person given credit. It is actually in the scripture. Let's see. Where was first used? Okay, yeah. Acts 11:26, it looks like, is what I'm looking for. So if we go to Acts chapter 11, and let me switch screens real quick so that you see what I'm saying. Okay, so this is Book of Acts 11, chapter 26. They're talking about the church in Antioch. It says, Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul. Saul is Paul's name before he became Paul. And when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. So for a whole year, Barnabas and Saul met with the church and taught great numbers of people. The disciples were called Christians first at Antioch. And so the name pops up for the first time right here. And so contrary to what some people say, yes, the word Christian is in fact in the Bible as a descriptor of those who follow Christ. Christian was a derogatory term used for the followers of Christ. Christian literally meaning little Christ. And so it was used as an insult, like, look at those little Christs, which doesn't sound like much of an insult today, but I guess 2,000 years ago that would have landed. But that insult then became something where people were like, that's not a bad descriptor. Let's go with that. And so they kind of stuck with it. But that's where the term comes from. It was, as far as I know, there's never been a singular person to claim to be the originator of the term. Let's see. Robert says, Chuck Norris turned 86 the other day. Neil Sedaka also passed away the other day. I did not hear about Neil Sedaka, and happy birthday, Chuck. But Chuck is probably going to live forever. Let's see. Guess it could have been called Children of Christ or Jesusans, but Christian's pretty good branding. Well, like I said, it was based on his actual title of being the Christ. And Christ is a term that, because in the Greek, it's like Christos. It's very similar, but Christ is just the Greek word for Messiah. And so Christians are people who believe that Christ indeed was the Messiah. Lightning powers and a power glove. I'm not sure what the point of that was, but okay. Fifth episode of Monarch has some great. First episode of Monarch has some great Titan CG. I'm mixed on. I did watch the first. I don't know. I might not have finished the first episode yet, so never mind. I'll withhold statement. Young Abe Simpson versus Cotton Hill. Now, that's an interesting one because, Abe was known to have been, he fought in the war, but Cotton Hill, of course, was also, he fought in Vietnam specifically. I think Abe fought in World War II, but I could be wrong. They might have changed it over the years. But at any rate, I would have to give it to Cotton Hill because while Abe Simpson didn't get his shins blown off, Abe Simpson also doesn't seem like he's quite the warrior that Cotton Hill was. And I watched The Housemaid last night. It's pretty good if you look at it as a comedy. Really? You would call that a comedy? I mean, if it's the movie I'm thinking of, because remember, I believe that you're talking about the one that where the girl's hired as a housemaid, um, and psycho bad things happen, where the guy is locking people into the attic. That movie, I don't see how you would look at that as a comedy. Give you a good reason to use your whiteboard. The housemaid? Not sure why. Should install a chalkboard. Much more classic. I hate. You know what? And now my wife is convinced that I suffer from low grade autism, but yeah, the idea of chalk just bothers me. I couldn't do it. I'm planning to watch Conan the Barbarian today after hearing that Arnold is talking about finally doing another sequel. Really? He's talking about doing a sequel now? Okay. That's interesting, but I did not know that. Just like last night's Me TV TOS episode was a mock time, was never brought up again. What did Spock do when Ponfar came up on him afterwards? Did he and Chapel get busy? Well, since he had divorced to Pring, I guess that's a possibility. But I will say, to say it's never come up again is not true. I can think of twice at least that it's come up. Star Trek 3, obviously, Spock did in fact get busy with Saavik. And in Star Trek 4, some of the early drafts of the script had Saavik being pregnant from that encounter. In Star Trek, the original series, the episode The Cloud Minders, Spock had a semi-romantic relationship with a young lady, in that the two of them appreciated art together and had intellectual conversations and stuff. And she clearly wanted to get with Spock, and they talked about Ponfar. They didn't call it out by name, but she actually does, at one point in their conversation, they cut back and forth between what's going on with Spock and Kirk. And when they cut to Spock, she's asking him if the 7-year cycle can be broken. And Spock actually gives an interesting response. I'll just leave it at that. I'm not sure I've seen it, but I can't really remember much about it. Hope it holds up. Oh, you're talking about Conan? Yeah, we watched it not long ago. It's all right. It's kind of simplistic by today's standards. Arnold is in bad health. I hadn't heard that. That's too bad. He's probably too old to even for. That's what I was thinking. It's like King Conan would have been a great project for him like 15, 20 years ago. I think he's too old now. He should have done his first return to movies after being governor. I would agree with that, yes. And instead of doing more of his terrible Terminator sequels. Terminator sequels we shall not talk about. Speaking of Wonder Man, he's actually one of my favorite B-list Marvel heroes. I'm not crazy about how he went from being strong guy to an energy guy, Human Torch with Kirby Crackle. I don't know anything about that, Darren. I'll be honest. I have very, very few comics with Wonder Man in him. As you know, I'm more of a Fantastic Four guy. But so, yeah, I know almost nothing about him other than I knew he was a strong guy. I didn't, the whole energy thing, I knew nothing about until very recently. I know that you hated the idea of the Wonder Man series. I think that it was actually pretty good, but you do have to take it that this is not the comic book 616 universe. And so, yes, they do some things differently. But and if you can accept that, I think it was a decent series. So Christians was like the N-word. It very much was, yes. We tried to take away its power by adopting it. Except that in the case of Christianity, I think that because while it was a derogative term, it was not a um, uh, a crass slur in the way that the N word is. It was not an offensive word per se, even if it was derogatory. It'd be like calling someone ignorant as opposed to calling them, something that could not be technically correct, and the Christ. Yeah. Bust be a Jewish term originally. Bust be a, I assume you must. Well, the idea of the Christ was a Jewish concept. But actually, the word Christ, I don't know if the Greek word Christos literally means savior, but let's find out. Let's see. So the literal meaning of Christ is the anointed one, a title from the Greek word Christos, which directly translates the Hebrew Messiah. It signifies someone chosen and consecrated by God, like ancient kings and priests. But in Jesus' case, it identifies him as the promised king and deliverer. So anyone who is, like, you could call Neo from the Matrix the Christ of that world, right? Because he's the chosen one. Luke Skywalker is the Christ of the Star Wars saga. The term that would not be blasphemous to say, because Christ doesn't specifically mean Son of God or something like that. It really means chosen one or anointed one. But in the modern vernacular, Christ has come to singularly mean Christ Jesus. But the word is Greek. The Hebrew word is Messiah. And that's just the English translation of the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word is like machin. I can't pronounce it. But something like Messiah. They had to give King Kong a power glove. Oh, that's what you're talking about. Yes, that was dumb. Yes, the one with the locking people in the attic. Yeah, I don't understand why you would see that as a comedy. It's so ridiculous that I had to laugh. Okay, I don't see it that way, but okay. Just like last night, MeTV showed the original Friday the 13th, which in my opinion is still the best one in the franchise before they went overboard with Jason. I liked the first one. Actually, the second one was pretty good too. Right up until when they originally killed Jason. I think it was in the third one, the third or fourth one, I can't remember. But Jason didn't have any superpowers until he was resurrected by a lightning bolt in, I think, the fifth one. A lot of people just say, oh, Jason is this unkillable thing, but he really wasn't until he got hit by a lightning bolt after he was killed. It's going to be a King Conan movie. All right, well, best of luck to him. Upside Down Man from DC versus Mephisto from Marvel. I don't know Upside Down Man from DC, so I couldn't tell you. Darren probably could. Speaking of the Fantastic Four, it's funny how many She-Hulk fans say today, who, when you mention Wyatt Wingfoot. Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, because Wyatt Wingfoot he was a side character at best, right? And for those of you that don't know, Wyatt Wingfoot was She-Hulk's main squeeze for a while. But, that maybe, if they hadn't of botched so many things about She-Hulk season 1, we could meet Wyatt in She-Hulk season 2, but that's obviously not going to happen unless they just reboot She-Hulk and try to pretend that series never happened. Which is too bad. I actually like Tatiana as She-Hulk. I think that the writing definitely lacked in that series in a few areas, but I liked the overall feel of the show. I just think that the direction the show went, where they kind of undermined the whole MCU, I think that was a mistake. But I did like the show as a whole. I did like the casting as a whole. I'd like to see them try again and do better. Young Michael versus Hank Hill. Me versus Hank Hill? I'd probably have to give it to Hank Hill. He kicked my butt. Maybe I found it funny because I sort of remembered your review. You didn't know exactly how it was going to unfold. Okay. Wyatt Wingfoot was She-Hulk's boyfriend throughout the 80s. She wasn't a slut back then. Okay. I don't think that she was really a slut in the She-Hulk series. Well, she was over-sexualized for sure, but slut by the modern definition, I would say no. But then the modern definition is if you call someone a slut, you're slut shaming. So there's that. Sidetracker, could any superhero be able to defeat the Mask and his power set? Oh, sure. I mean, the Mask, if you're talking about, I'm assuming you mean the Jim Carrey version of the Mask. The Mask is powerful to be sure, but keep in mind that even within the universe, the Mask is simply a powered artifact that belonged to Loki, which means that probably any of the Asgardians would be fully capable of defeating the Mask, particularly Thor. Loki would certainly be capable of it. And any being that was, I mean, basically, like someone like Doctor Strange could probably easily defeat the Mask. And anybody that realized what the source, like if Reed Richards got more than one shot at it and he realized that the source of the Mask's powers was his mask, he would figure out a way to separate the mask from the person. That's kind of how Reed works. I'm not sure someone could actually manage to pull their own front teeth. There would have been a lot more blood. Well, okay, so the front teeth thing, I would agree that, like, and that scene is tough to watch sometimes. Guy Tay, he's grabs some pliers, grabs his tooth, yanks it out. Now, under normal circumstances, I'd say no, a person couldn't pull out their own front teeth. If you're afraid that the consequence of not pulling out your front teeth would be death, could you do it? Possibly. I don't know. I still think it'd be very difficult to do that kind of damage to yourself. But I get that. However, that's one of those I'll, suspend disbelief for the sake of a film. Mr. Know-It-All versus Shrek. They'd start to fight, but then they'd fall in love and get married. In the comics, since the 90s, She-Hulk has been depicted in bed with Juggernaut, Thing, Hercules, and Vapid underwear models. Well, I'm glad I stopped reading comic books then. That's it goes back to my, I've talked about this before, but I think that, people, it's so funny to me that so many people can be so clueless about things that are so obvious. Comic books don't sell anymore. And people say that, oh, well, we've outgrown them, or, we have better forms of media now with, modern TV and movies or whatever. We have a million excuses. But we don't stop to think about the fact maybe it's just the comic books suck now. Maybe comic books didn't need to go dark after The Dark Knight, which is a massive problem in the industry. Ever since, and this, Aaron, ever since 1986, when The Dark Knight came out, The comic books started trying to go darker and darker and darker. And it's gotten to the point now where, quite frankly, it's, I felt it by the early 1990s. I was done because it was just, one dark story after another. Now, some people enjoyed that, and I know some people like people like Danny will defend it, suggesting that, oh, comic books grew up with us, kind of thing. But the thing is that comic books aren't supposed to be a maturing media, in my opinion. They should still be appropriate for younger audiences. Otherwise, you're never going to get any new audience. It's kind of the same problem that Star Trek's having with modern Trek, and I would include pretty much every show except for Prodigy in this. Is that Trek doesn't, because if Prodigy is supposed to get you to watch Star Trek, supposed to get kids to watch Star Trek, where are they supposed to go from there? They certainly can't watch any of the new shows, but they could go back and watch the original series and some stuff from the Berman era. Now, has Star Trek always had adult themes and dealt with adult issues? Absolutely. But it didn't do it in a way that would be considered offensive to show to children like they do now. Yeah, the teeth and the slashing her own belly were a bit over the top, nearly comical. I don't think I don't think it's comical. I think that it is a little over the top, but I don't know. Maybe you and I just have very different senses of humor. In the original Total Recall movie, why didn't Quaid have a broken nose after he pulled out that oversized device that was implanted in him? Well, he should have, but that's where you get into the nitpickiness of it. And I mean, granted, I know I do that all the time, especially with Star Trek stuff, hence some of the math on the board. But when it comes to a show like Total Recall, was I worried about the fact that the bulb, when he pulled out of his nose, should have actually wrecked his nose? No, because it's just a stupid movie. If that were an episode of Star Trek, I probably would have gone off about it. And your roots are showing. My roots are showing. Oh, no, wait. They're pretty much the same. Hair is a privilege. Okay. Darren says the biggest problem with comic books today, in my opinion, is that they try to simulate a cinematic experience. They have forgotten that comics do the same thing. Comics do some things way better than TV and movies. Well, comic books don't try to be you're right. Comic books are not trying to be comic books anymore. They're trying to be mini movies or storyboards for movies, really. But the stupid thing, though, is that notice that when the MCU started struggling was when they were trying to emulate modern comics. Because if you look at the Infinity Saga, most of the stories in that felt like they were right out of the 70s and 80s, and they really worked. When you get into the post-Infinity War, a lot of that stuff felt like it was from the 90s and 2000s, and it kind of fell apart. And so, I think that I'm hoping that Doomsday, and if the last couple of things that they've done are indicators of it, I think it will. I think that we're moving back towards the 70s/80s vibe. And apparently the old Treks actually do very well on streaming. Because the old Treks are far superior. I'm sorry, they just are. The original series is still, in my opinion, the best, the quintessential, the peak Star Trek. And it's not just because I'm old that I say that. The more that I analyze this stuff, the more I realize that the original series got it right. And everything else just tried to do it, but do it differently. My favorite TNG physics moments: Geordi extending warp field around another ship and climbing to it, then staring into the oncoming space at warp. Talk about exposed. I think you're thinking of Enterprise. unless there's an episode that I'm not thinking of. But I remember in Enterprise, they did something like that with Trip, where the the NX-02 was going to, and with the NX-01, they got their warp fields together, and then Trip literally climbed from one ship to the other. I don't remember Geordi doing it, but maybe it's an episode that I'm just not remembering. Young Michael versus Jack Tripper. That'd probably be a draw. Sorry, the roots and things being a privilege are from that movie. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yes. Now I remember when he was a sick perfectionist. Now, he kind of reminded me of, if you haven't seen it, there's a movie that I thought of when I saw this movie. It's called Sleeping with the Enemy, a Julia Roberts film. Really good depiction of an abusive relationship and escaping from it. And Darren says, oh, and by the way, moo ha ha ha, if you want to back an old school monster hero comic book, check out Demifoot Urban Sasquatch, found on my comic by Wagner Dillard. Yes, indeed. So if you want to check out Darren's wacky writing, check out Demifoot Urban Sasquatch. Robert says, Sudger, you really should watch Star Trek Continues. If you haven't seen it yet, it's really studio quality Star Trek fan series. I hate Star Trek Continues. I'm sorry. I don't, generally not a big fan of fan films anyway, but yeah, don't get me wrong. It's some of the stuff is really well done, but some of the stuff is really badly done, especially the acting. Image exploded with Spawn. The Marvel, unfortunately, tried to adopt similar dark atmosphere to compete. No, it wasn't Spawn that did it. Spawn was a result of it. Spawn was Todd McFarlane breaking off from Marvel because Marvel wouldn't let him go as dark as he wanted with Venom. So by the way, you ever notice that Venom and Spawn are basically the same thing? It's because they are the same thing created by the same guy. It's just that, he had to come up with a different name. So he came up with Spawn. But basically what you see in Spawn is what Todd McFarlane wanted to do with Venom. And I think Spawn has some interesting ideas, but again, it's way too dark. And it's straight up satanic. Let's see. The best thing about Trip going from the NX-02 to the NX-01 at Warp was that the ship with the female captain was at the bottom in the shot. Okay. Tristan says, good evening. How you doing? Or good morning, Tristan. Hope you are doing well. I keep forgetting, man, I gotta, next week I'm going to do better, Tristan, I swear. We got to keep that email up for the live streams to try and get people to join our little group. And it has a great scene with Sydney Sweeney. Well, there you go. I think they might be real. God bless her. Just like a couple of days ago, Dave Cullen did a video about a new Trek show in the works called Year One, just another prequel show. Yeah, but the dumb thing about that is, look, Star Trek Year One's been talked about for a year. Dave Cullen's just looking for material. If you don't like, and don't get me wrong, I'm actually not opposed to, I don't like the title Star Trek Year One, but I absolutely want to see a sequel series to Strange New Worlds that features Ethan Peck's Spock. Because unlike so many people like Dave Cullen, I actually like Ethan Peck's Spock. And I can't remember the name of the guy that's playing Kirk in Strange New Worlds, but I actually like him as well. He's not trying to be William Shatner, and I'm okay with that. Because you can only do this so much before it just sounds stupid. So, and he's not doing it. So awesome. The only fan film that challenged actual Star Trek was Prelude to Axanar. Yeah, and look what that did for everybody. Darren, are you sexualizing the Enterprise? Yeah, I think he is. It's going to take place before Where No Man Has Gone Before. Yes, I already know all about it. That's the problem is Dave Cullen is talking about very old news and trying to make it relevant because he was looking for clickbait material. Star Trek Year One has been in the pitch stage for a long time. It is in no way, shape, or form a thing as of yet. Because, we need to basically Skydance, as far as I know, has not approved it as of yet. And we'll see if they do. I hope they do. And people like Dave Cullen and Nerdrotic and Doomcock and all the rest are going to hate it no matter what, because it's produced by, Alex Kurtzman. And Alex Kurtzman apparently is the Antichrist. But while I don't like all the, most of the Kurtzman tracks, I enjoyed Lower Decks quite a bit, and I enjoyed Strange New Worlds quite a bit. The rest, not so much. I think you're right. Enterprise, not TNG. Memory sure is a funny thing, filling in missing details with the wrong specifics. Yeah, I'm trying to picture Geordi climbing a ladder between ships, and it's like, no, that's Trip, I'm pretty sure. And let's see. What would Year One be? How far back can they go? Well, we don't know. So what we do know is that Kirk took over the Enterprise from Pike. We don't know the exact year that happened. And so we also know that Kirk was on a 5-year mission during the original series, but we don't know that was his first time on the Enterprise, was the 5-year mission. So if the 5-year mission was the beginning of Kirk's career on the Enterprise, then it could take place as much as 2 years prior to Where No Man Has Gone Before. Personally, I think that they just need to come out and say, yeah, this is a different timeline, reboot, whatever you want to call it, and just go from there and stop worrying about overlap. Because I think you just call it a reboot. We have Enterprise showing the first Warp 5 ship and the real start of human space exploration. Except that I think the Enterprise... Don't get me wrong. There were some things about Enterprise I really enjoyed. I think that show got way too much hate. However, I also, by the way, notice only 7 minutes left. I also think that Enterprise should have had more primitive technology than they did. It was way too advanced to be 100 years prior to the original series. So if you go further back, then wouldn't that be The Expanse? Well, the funny thing is The Expanse takes place in the 23rd century, so The Expanse takes place at the same time as the original series, not Enterprise. But that being said, yeah, you could have something like The Expanse for the earlier, like what was pre-warp Earth like prior to or during World War III. I'm waiting for the Kurtzman era of Star Trek to end before I build any anticipation of new Star Trek shows. Well, good luck with that. You know what? Kurtzman isn't the problem. If he was, then, because look, Kurtzman, if you compare Roddenberry, Berman, Kurtzman, Roddenberry is probably the worst of the three, which is kind of sad. Also, William Shatner is going to be releasing a metal cover album. More Shatner, just make talking music again. Oh man, that would be freaking awesome. I want to see him do I want to see William Shatner does Baby Got Back. That's what I want. Dave Cullen versus Doomcock. The two of them will just make out, I think. Kurtzman isn't the Antichrist. Simon Pegg is. You told me so yourself. Well, that's true. Simon Pegg. Oh, man. Don't get me started on Simon Pegg. Gorilla in all caps going, Kapla, don't know how long I'll be here. Power is flickering from the blizzard. You have a blizzard? Wow. Because we can't just bury the power lines like we do everything else. Well, sorry. Dave Cullen versus young Michael. Dave Cullen probably beat me up. I was never a particularly athletic person. The NX-01, having way too advanced tech, can be laid squarely in the feet of UPN and their interference. I know that there's some truth to that, but, then they should, and honestly, what they should have done is if the network said, no, you got to have it more advanced, then they should have pushed the timeline further forward. So instead of 100 years prior to the original series, it should have been like 50 or even 20 years prior. Shatner's going to do stuff from Black Sabbath and other classic rock. That's cool, but I still want him to do Baby Got Back. Baby Got Back. Oh, man. I like big butts, I cannot lie. You other brothers might deny, but when a girl walks in with an itty bitty waist and a round thing in your face, you get sprung. Yeah. Oh, man, I want that so bad. Best thing about the new Running Man is that it did so poorly that Edgar Wright is planning to return to the Cornette series. I don't know what the Cornette series is, but I disagree with you, Stan. I enjoyed that Running Man movie, and I'm disappointed that it didn't do well. It's actually closer to the book than the original Running Man movie, and I think it's a better movie than the original Running Man movie. Hopefully, you can also redeem Simon Pegg. I'm Simon Pegg. I don't understand why people think he's such a great comedic presence in the world. I have yet to see something of Simon Pegg's that had me just rolling on the floor laughing. Like people, oh, you should see Shaun of the Dead. So I watched Shaun of the Dead, and I'm like, okay, when is this supposed to get really super funny? Because I just don't see it. The concept is funny, but I just don't find it particularly funny. And as far as what he did to Star Trek, he was, I'm sorry, what Simon Pegg did for Star Trek was far worse than anything Kurtzman did. Cornette series is Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and End of the World. Oh, well, okay, so 3 movies that suck. I've seen, Shaun of the Dead, I attempted to watch, never made it all the way through it. Hot Fuzz, I watched like the first half hour of and thought, this is just boring. End of the World, I actually watched the whole thing. It was, watchable, but not that good. People think it's, why do people think these are great movies? I don't get it. Now, granted, entertainment is subjective, but I don't get it. Point to the doll where Simon Pegg hurt you. Yeah. Brain broken. Trust us, got to run. See you Wednesday. All right. See you Wednesday, my friend. I'm going to be running in 2 minutes and 6 seconds. Let's see. Adrian Monk versus Columbo. That would be an interesting matchup because both of them are weird. Both of them are genius. Both of them have similar lines of work, although Adrian works as a consultant and Columbo is an active detective. Man, that's a tough one. I would see, and neither of them are particularly gifted in terms of combat. But now I haven't watched all of Columbo, at least not in a long, long time. And I haven't even watched all of Monk. But I would say that combat-wise, Adrian Monk has the edge. I think we've seen him do more combat than Columbo. So I'm going to give it to Adrian. Any plans for a public Bible stream this week? I hope so. I know I haven't done much in the last couple of weeks. And it's been more due to time and health issues than anything else. I do have a doctor's appointment on Tuesday, but hopefully I'll be able to find some time outside of that. Did we finish Leviticus? No, we still have like one chapter left of Leviticus, but I was thinking about doing like random Bible streams during the week, at least until I start school. And then we'll see what happens at that point. Your Shatner impression on Big Butts nearly killed me. Well, I got to say, I'm an old man. I loved Sir Mix-a-Lot back in the day, and I love William Shatner. He's the only celebrity who, when I met, I actually got starstruck. And in the 13 seconds I have left, I just have to say, what? I like big butts. Is that a crime?